Thank you. Mr Speaker, I ask, what is a reputation worth? It meant everything to Australian actress and comedian Rebel Wilson, who successfully sued Bauer Media for defamation on a series of gossip magazine articles she claimed painted her as a serial liar. Brand reputation is worth a staggering $8.5 million in the instant messaging app Skype, which was purchased in Microsoft in 2011. Like Google, Skype has become a verb in the modern vernacular, and when you are battling for the hearts and minds and money of consumers in the information-saturated world, name recognition is priceless. Today I rise to speak to protect the reputation of an industry that is central to Australia's economy and the Australian way of life. Today I am speaking about the Australian beef industry. The Competition and Consumer Amendment Safeguarding the Reputation of Australian Beef Bill seeks to safeguard one of the country's oldest and most profitable export industries from losing its good name through no fault of its own. This bill, if passed, would make it illegal for an Australian company or an individual in Australia to market beef as an Australian product if the meat they are selling hasn't been processed under Australian standards and regulations and, importantly, in Australia. We have high food standards in Australia and they cost money, big money, and they are the reason that we have a quality range of standards. And that quality, that well-earned reputation, is worth a premium to export markets. That premium help pays for animal welfare regulations for the ethical transporting, handling and processing of Australian beef. It helps to pay for strict food hygiene processes and modern equipment at our abattoirs, and it helps to pay the award wages that ensure Australian working conditions, good conditions for 35,000 full-time equivalent jobs provided by the meat processing industry in Australia. So we at NXT believe it is manifestly unfair that a company could bypass all that regulation and scrutiny by processing Australian cattle overseas but still profiting from the reputation of Australian beef by marketing their product as Australian beef. We would go so far to say that it is un-Australian to take a free ride on the hard work of others. And so we at NXT want to keep those 35,000 jobs in Australia and the 100,000 indirect jobs associated with meat processing through sectors such as transport and storage. We believe that this bill will close a loophole and ensure a level playing field for the beef industry and red meat industry as a whole. We understand from our discussion with industry bodies that beef products derived from live cattle export are not permitted to market themselves as Australian beef products. We also understand that it can be hard to police, particularly in the markets of less developed countries, and it can be difficult to seek enforcement of market breaches from other sovereign nations. And that's why we need to have these safeguards in place within Australia. Penalties in this bill include a maximum fine of $1.1 million for Australian companies and corporate bodies and $220,000 for individuals. These are substantive enough to deter those determined to get around the rules. If the threat of a court conviction and the public attention would not be enough, I think the dollars certainly are. Last year, the red meat and livestock industry, including domestic and live export markets, was worth $22.9 billion to this nation. The red meat industry, that includes sheep, lamb, goats, as well as beef, directly employs around 200,000 people, including on-farm production, processing and retail. Last year, Australia processed 7.9 million head of cattle and exported $7.15 billion worth of beef. Fewer than 23 million lambs, 7 million sheep and about 2 million goats were processed. Australia is the largest exporter of sheep meat in the world, with a total value of lamb exports in the 2015-16 year estimated at $1.7 billion, with mutton being worth $700 million. There are about 200 licensed abattoirs in Australia, including 78 export-accredited plants processing in red meat. They are jobs in regional Australia, and we need to safeguard those jobs. The red meat processing industry is a huge contributor to Australia's bottom line and a major employer. And as I said, we cannot afford to put this Australian-based industry in jeopardy by taking away their competitive advantage and their reputation quality. And so in 2015-16 alone, Meat Livestock Australia spent $24 million on its activities, including developing market access, marketing meat products, meat safety and traceability programs, training, research and development. That's a significant investment. That money was raised mainly through processor and producer levies, with some match funding from government and research. This is an industry walking the walk to ensure its longevity. We need to safeguard that investment by ensuring other enterprises don't ruin Australia's reputation by selling meat that is substandard or processed in an environment where we as Australians cannot determine its standards and yet labelling it as an Australian product. You only have to look at the food contamination scandals that we've seen in the United Kingdom with mad cow disease, E. coli outbreaks at Jack in the Box burgers in the US. We've seen it even with berries and hepatitis scares, how easily an industry can take a blow to its reputation. When overseas buyers pay a premium for an Australian steak, they know they are purchasing a meat cut that will not only taste delicious, but it has been ethically and hygienically prepared. Australian processors manage that reputation through strict regulations. The Australian-based industry should not be made to take on the responsibility for the risks associated with plants outside of its borders, control and management. We have no jurisdiction over regulating overseas enterprises, but we can close the gate before the cattle have bolted. The Competition and Consumer Amendment, the amendment I'm putting forward, safeguarding the reputation of Australian beef, seeks to shield the Australian beef industry from losing its good name through no fault of its own, and we need to ensure a level playing field and prevent the unnecessary export of Australian jobs.